It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by AgileDad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. So the question of the day has to be, why does Scrum always get a black eye? Why does it always have this undeserved bad reputation? I've heard so many people, especially in the last little bit, say that Scrum doesn't work or that Scrum is not the answer. And the truth is, you can feel that way. There's nothing wrong with feeling that way because Scrum isn't perfect, right? There's certainly things to dislike about it. I'll admit openly, I've been critical about certain things. But what strikes me is that most people are criticizing it are for reasons that don't involve Scrum itself. They're criticizing it because they don't understand and they're giving it an undeserved bad reputation. So the question is, how can we get past this bad reputation and stop blaming Scrum for everything that's going wrong in our projects? Because we all know that's not the case. So if you think about it from the perspective of the Scrum Guide, it's only 17 pages. In 17 pages, you can get everything you need to know about Scrum in its entirety, yet people still want to take it, out of context, or they want to say something different about it. So I thought that I would give you the top 5 misunderstandings or the top 5 practices that give Scrum this undeserved black eye and that make people look down on it. Let's start right from the top. Number 1 is micromanagement. Look, Scrum can, but should never be used for micromanagement of a team. I think teams need to work at a predetermined capacity, which many people get confused with velocity, to allow them to maximize the efficiency of what they can deliver from the product backlog. That doesn't mean you're going to fill every moment of their time. In fact, we all know that most team members work on average about 5.896 hours a day, just under 6 hours, and that there's a lot that we can learn from the way team members operate. So I think that if you stretch people to their limits and force them into a place where they're working overtime or weekends, cutting corners in quality, that's when you're going to start to see things fall apart. And the first thing people do is they say, Scrum's the problem. And that's not the problem at all. If you allow teams to internally decide who does what, where, when, and how, if you allow them to operate where there's no hierarchies, there's product owners and Scrum masters and development teams that all work together. If the developers own the sprint backlog, which means that they can plan for the sprint and figure out how to do things. If the commitment to the sprint is actually achieving the sprint goal and not just committing to finishing all the items as planned, as directed. I think that if you make these small changes and make sure that the team has a clear understanding of a definition of done that's possible and that the work coming into the team is prepared to a point where it's ready to be consumed, that it's refined. I think if we do these things, it's going to help the team be successful. All right, let's go to number 2. The number 2 thing that gives Scrum a black eye is when people come out of the gate and say, sprints are all just mini waterfalls. Let's treat them like that. Okay, I am guilty. When you first start doing Agile, when you first switch from a waterfall method to an Agile framework, one of the things you're going to notice is that sprints do feel like miniature waterfalls. It's like short milestones. As you're doing your work breakdown structure, you're going to find as you transition out of a Gantt chart and a project file that it's easy to set up sprints as milestones and it's easy to do these mini waterfalls. It's just when you do this, it keeps people aligned with that traditional waterfall approach. And I think the goal here should not be to stay aligned with that approach. The goal here should be to expand and to let people understand how that framework is going to help them address complexity. In the Scrum Guide, the most recent version, it says, quote, "In complex environments, what will happen is unknown. This is why Scrum works with a product goal to formulate the desired future state of a product instead of just focused on output, how many lines of code you're cranking out, how many backlog items you're doing, how many story points you're completing." All right, let's go to number 3. Number 3 is excessive meetings. Now, this one I hear all the time. We can't do Scrum because we have so many meetings, or everything about Scrum is time consuming and soul sucking. You're sucking away my will to live. But what people don't see is, sprint planning. Why does it need to be hours long? Well, maybe if you didn't do refinement, it does need to be hours long. But if you do things properly, you can get some of these meetings condensed down to a reasonable time frame. Now, I'm not saying condense down the meetings to a reasonable time frame to sacrifice quality. I'm saying condense these down to a reasonable time frame so that you can better understand increments, so that you can better understand delivery, so you can course correct when and where needed, and so you can leverage the review and other things to make sure you're adhering to the sprint and product goal. If you can compress down these meetings to the things that matter most and get the right people in a room, so remember the rats, the roster, the agenda, the time box, and making sure that you have the right host of people there, right? If you can do those things, that's going to help you adhere to a schedule and get things done. All right, let's jump to number 4. I hear people say this one all the time. Story point estimation is terrible, right? That's what's broken about Scrum. Well, first of all, story points didn't necessarily come from Scrum. They came from Mike Cohn, but love him or hate him, I think that if you're just opposing story points, it means that you're trying to give yourself a false sense of security by doing story points, and you're just coming out and saying, well, they're often incorrect, or there's no correlation between story points and time, the actual duration it takes to complete a story. If you come in with that attitude, you're never going to be able to get there. And I think here's the problem. We are looking for precision estimates and not accurate estimates. If we try to accurately predict the size or scope of an item, instead of trying to accurately predict how long it's going to take, I think that we would have a mutual understanding that the teams need to complete the item and to make sure it fits inside of the sprint, and that the value alignment is there as opposed to just focusing on story points and ethereal just number out there, man. It's like far out. Or focusing on time where you're wrong 86, 88% of the time. You need to get to the point where you can really get in and understand why we're doing things the way we do, why teams aren't booked to their full capacity. What is our goal? What are we trying to take away? And how to creatively explore options to help people reach their goals. We should be focused on outcome, happy customers with as little output as possible. Okay, let's do the last one, number 5. We can't work in 2-week sprints. Oh my goodness, that's Scrum's fault. Okay, I've worked with teams that do 1-week sprints, 2-week sprints, 3-week sprints, 4-week sprints, and even one that did 6-week sprints. Not encouraged. But the point I'm trying to make is, depending on the type and scope of work you're doing, sometimes that boundary needs to change. Now, if the excuse for changing your sprint from 2 to 3 weeks is we didn't have enough time in 2 weeks to get it done, that's a symptom. You need to reduce the scope of your workload, limit your work in progress, and get it done in 2 weeks. If your excuse for not getting it done in 2 weeks is just it's impossible to get that amount of information that we need contained in 2 weeks, then maybe you're working on something so complex that it requires you to do a 3 or 4 week sprint. What I can tell you is I've seen 4-week sprints successful, but most of the time when teams lean in on 3 weeks, it's because they said, we didn't have enough time in 2, which isn't a good excuse to switch to 3, right? We need to remember Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law says that work will artificially expand to fill a pre-allocated amount of time. And I think that if we know this, we can't just go in and allow for extra time. We need to go in and say, okay, is there a legitimate reason why a different length sprint works better for this team? If so, let's adhere. If not, let's explain to the team that this could be problematic. We're trying to get alignment across most of the organization, and it would be in all of our best interest if we did X or A or B or C. And I think that if we can get to that point with our teams where we can have those radical candor conversations, it's going to make things a lot better for everybody. So focusing on the right sprint length, making sure you understand make sure you have a good understanding and the team has a good understanding of story points and how they work. Making sure that you have a good meetings playbook that goes through and describes some of the intricacies of how you're going to host meetings. Making sure that you're not treating sprints like complete mini waterfalls. And last and best, but not least, make sure you're not micromanaging the team. If you can do these things, you're going to have a much better implementation of Scrum. And Scrum won't get the black eye for all the things that could potentially go wrong. That's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a comment, question, or concern, or if there's a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at AgileDad.com. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.